Um, I don't see us on the YouTube page. It still says waiting for Namory. But I see YouTube live stream. Let me try refreshing the page. Oh, there we are. Amazing. All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are happy that you're here and happy that you downloaded the self guide if you've already done that. If you haven't, you can get it later at another time. But tonight we're going to be talking about relationships and psychedelics. And so we can do kind of a broad overview of the guide. And hold on. Now I just have.
For anybody watching, we're figuring out YouTube Live. I think there's a little delay between us and the live.
I don't know if it's what I have here is just a recording of us.
No, we're live. I can see it.
You can?
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Every single time we do a new technology, there's always figuring it out.
That's right.
So, yes, we created this self guide for couples who are doing ketamine experiences at home with their prescription. And so within the guide, there's a lot of background about relationships and how ketamine can be helpful for loosening some of the rigid patterns that we can get stuck in our relationships and creating more openness and empathy and an environment where deeper connection can happen. And then there are specific preparation questions. We go through different dosing models, what the actual journey will be like, and then integration and next steps. So you can ask us any questions about any of that. And Kayla and Skylar, is there anything that you would add just to the overview of the guide? All right. Awesome.
So for any folks who are watching live, you're welcome to pop questions into the chat on YouTube Live. If you're watching this later on a recording, that does not apply to you, but you can still email us any questions that you have at any time. You can reach out to us at info@enamory.org, and that'll be in your email too.
So then we did get lots of questions about relationships, and I have some questions about relationships. So really, we're going to spend this time talking about some of like the most common relationship questions that come up, and then we'll also think about how the guide can be helpful with some of these places where couples get stuck. And then we'll kind of keep our eye on the chat so you can pop anything in as we're going. So the first question I have is, so lots of couples come to us because there have been kind of deep hurts or betrayals or infidelity. And so the first question is, what is forgiveness and how do I forgive?
Just starting small with the really easy ones. Yeah, this is an incredibly common question for couples to have as they seek out therapy. It's one of the top reasons for couples to seek out couples therapy is if they're needing help moving past something hurtful in the relationship. And I really think about forgiveness first and foremost in terms of what it's not. It is definitely not forgetting that the hurtful thing ever happened. It's definitely not hanging on to it and staying actively mad about it forever. And it's also not getting caught up in an endless cycle of finger pointing and blame. So I really think about forgiveness as thinking about moving through what's hurtful in order to be able to move forward from it and to kind of file it away into the filing cabinet of our experiences of life so that it remains with us and we learn from it, but it's not something that's sort of front and center in all of our interactions all the time, and we can think about then building something new in its place, in place of the hurt.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that one place where we often get stuck is like we think that we are forgiving somebody. Like forgiveness is a gift that we are bestowing to someone else so that um they can feel free from whatever happened. And forgiveness is actually not for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. So when we are not forgiving, when we're gripping to resentment or pain, then we are really heavy and we experience a lot of pain. And so I forget where I read this, but forgiveness is the decision to release attachment to a painful past. Forgiveness is saying, I don't want this event to have a grip on me. And forgiveness is absolutely not a one and done. Forgiveness is something that we practice over and over and over again. And so we may have a memory pop into our mind, and the practice of recognizing it, observing it, creating space in yourself for the hurt and having compassion, and then letting it kind of flow through us. And that may happen hundreds of times a day in the beginning, but it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think sometimes people can get caught up in this idea that forgiveness is letting someone get away with a behavior that is very painful and, not in line with their values or ethics. And that can be what holds us on to holding grudges. A colleague of mine had shared that, holding a grudge is almost like holding hot coals in your own hands and expecting the other person to get burned. And in the same way, like forgiveness is something that we free ourselves of that pain. It's not, again, for the other person as we're talking about. It's a way where you really honor your emotions.
Yeah. It's a good point about like sometimes we hang on to anger and pain and particularly grudges, I think is a good way to put it, right? It's like this sort of resentment that we direct at somebody else and we think that that's punishing them, and we really
Mm.
orient ourselves in our relationship around how do I punish this person? How do I make sure that they don't get away with what they did to me, right? And the bottom line is you can't have a relationship with somebody that is oriented around trying to somehow enforce a consequence on them or punish them, right? We really have to think about our own boundaries and what is within our control and not within our control. And a relationship between two equal people is not centered around how to punish somebody for their behavior, right? That's a totally different kind of relationship. And so I think when we want to stay in connection with other people, or even if we don't, I think letting go of this need to think about how do I enforce some kind of consequences or somehow punish somebody or control their behavior, right? Like that's a real dead end strategy. And so if we can let go of that, then I think that's one of the most powerful things about forgiveness.
Hmm. Yeah, this question often comes up with infidelity
Hmm.
of like, can we resolve this, or can we move through this, or can we recover from this? And the question is actually like, can I be in a relationship where infidelity is part of our history? Can I, as the person who had an affair, live with whatever pain and shame I'm going to carry? And can my partner be in a relationship where these memories are going to come up sometimes? And they are also always going to walk with some pain. Like, can we both accept that this is part of our history and forgive and move through it?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking too about what you said about it's not a one and done. That happens so often when we're working with couples to treat. There's a lot of really good, I think, couple therapy protocols that have been written around how to heal from infidelity, and not a single one of them is like you talk about it once and then you leave it alone for the rest of your lives and never revisit it. And infidelity is a type of relational trauma, right? As trauma therapists, we sometimes we'll call that a little T trauma instead of a big T trauma, which means you're not going to get a PTSD diagnosis for it, but it has a lot of the same features of a trauma. It really disrupts your sense of safety and the way that you have understood yourself and others in the world. And because of that, it needs processing, right? That's how we heal from trauma is we think about it, we process it, we talk about it, and that needs to happen again and again. And so sometimes that can be really hard for the person who is engaged in the infidelity. They're going to have to tolerate those conversations again and again and again in order for the relationship and the partner to have a chance to heal. Yeah. And I think one of the best things that we can do as couples therapists for couples who are in that position is to really help hold them and support them to stay present for all of those really tough conversations, because you got to be able to have them in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm. And where the self-guide can come in really useful for this. So I'm going to say CAP because I don't want anything to be suppressed.
Sometimes we get into censorship jail when we say the word that we mean here.
But yeah, CAP can be really helpful for like dropping us into our experience. So we can do a lot of like skirting and dancing around our experience because the feelings are big and the feelings are painful and they can feel overwhelming. And then we can get dysregulated and we can have conversations that are not productive and are more hurtful. And so CAP can be really helpful for like really softening and dropping us into our bodies and into our emotions and allowing kind of more space to have these really challenging conversations, these really vulnerable conversations. And if you're doing this on your own, we have prep questions around what am I avoiding? What are stories that are coming up? So you can kind of, those prep questions are broad and you can think of them, you can get more specific with them depending on what kind of issue or challenge or deepening positive thing you're wanting to look at in your medicine journey.
And working toward forgiveness is a really beautiful intention to bring to a couple's CAP journey. We always recommend that folks hold their relationship intentions lightly, but think about it like an invitation, right? If you want to invite further exploration of what does forgiveness feel like. I know, Chandra, you had a couple that you were working with one time who really experienced the feeling of forgiveness in their body. And that can be something that we can do during these medicine journeys that can be so powerful. So that's, I think, a real draw for a lot of folks to this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the really cool thing about CAP is that any psychedelic experience, you don't totally know what you're gonna get. But it can be something very unexpected that can help lead to kind of forgiveness. I did a medicine session last week with this kind of intention of forgiveness, and what I actually saw was like kind of movie on fast forward of lots of positive memories, which I think kind of soften and create more empathy and willingness to have a different perspective. And that wasn't what I thought I would experience. So yeah, your mind and body will kind of give you whatever is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the self-guide for the prep questions, like there is a portion that gives some direction around how to have a conversation about the intentions you've set. And even just that, like engaging in that form of sharing where you're really intentionally listening to what the other person's experience is and then like reflecting that back to them and vice versa, that in and of itself, even like taking out the next step deeper with the dosing session, can be a really lovely experience to just feel like you hear your partner and you're heard in a different way.
Hmm.
So that's a nice skill set in there.
And if you don't have a prescription, even just sitting down with like Kayla's favorite yin yoga playlist. And
It's magic, you guys.
really sitting there for an intentional 30 minutes to an hour and watching your experience, allowing yourself to kind of move out of the need to be doing and busy and just kind of watch your mind and see what your mind shows you and see what your body feels like. You will still have a meaningful experience. Something will show up that is useful if you follow the preparation and intention setting.
Absolutely. If you get the self guide and you notice kind of throughout, we'll mention, you're using a prescription medication and you should take it as prescribed, right? And so that's sort of the intention, is that you use your prescription in this way. However, some people don't have a prescription, don't want to get a prescription. Maybe their partner does and they prefer not to. There are lots of ways of still engaging in this process together with a partner that don't involve any kind of medication at all. And so I think that's also something that I really want to emphasize, that you can explore together, just as Chandra's saying. Sitting with your partner with time and space and intention, and just really making room for that in your relationship, listening to some quiet music and just kind of following, your breath and following your mind, can be incredibly powerful on its own. So even if you're thinking, I don't know about this psychedelic part, I don't know about this intention part, I encourage you to think about, is there something you can get out of the journey, even if it's totally non-drug assisted, even if it's just meditation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We got through one question.
We're such therapists.
I don't know that my chats are coming through. Can other people see chats?
I can see the chat box. I don't know that we have any.
Okay.
Give us a test question, folks who are watching, so that we can see if our chat is working.
Okay, what if I write in the chat? Did you see that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, it's working.
Okay, it's working. Great.
Cool. All right. This person. Oh, love it. Thanks. Thanks, Corey. So this person said, what should I do if I'm triggered by my partner? So I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe in daily life, if they're having the experience where they're triggered, how can they navigate that without escalating? Or what are different paths if you're being triggered by your partner?
Well, I think one of the first things that I think about is sort of what is a trigger. And usually what we mean by that is a small thing, relatively speaking, that leads to a bigger reaction, relatively speaking, right? And so usually when people say I'm triggered, what they mean is my feelings or my reaction seems kind of disproportionately big, maybe, given what happened, right? And what that speaks to is that there's something more going on underneath the surface. And so I think step one is to get really curious about your own experience. What am I actually feeling here? What are some of the stories that are coming up for me that are connected to my feelings? I like the metaphor here of like looking under a car hood, right? You might be hearing a funky noise, but like, let's pop the hood and actually see what's going on under there. And then if you can kind of dig around in your own experience and pull out maybe some vulnerabilities, maybe there are some feelings of something very tender, right, and very soft. Maybe there's some stories that come up for you that are a little bit more vulnerable. If you can start to explore that in and of yourself, and then maybe even share those with a partner, I think that really puts you on the path to healing and connection, rather than kind of escalating by getting triggered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Acceptance and commitment therapy has this moment called a choice point. So we have these moments in our life all the time, where we can either kind of act out of fear or reaction or act values based. And so, and that moment tells us a lot about what's important to us, what's happening in this scenario. And then we have a choice, right? We can either snap back at our partner and yell at them or shut down and pull away, or we can be values aligned and look at, what is this vulnerability and what is my value? My value is connection with my partner. The way that I'm going to get connection with my partner is by saying, hey, we when you walked through the kitchen and I was emptying the dishwasher and you just walked by me and didn't even acknowledge me, it made me feel like I'm doing this house, this life by myself. It's not rational. It's not realistic. It's emptying the dishwasher. But I recognize that come up in me. And I could have snapped at you, or I can share this vulnerability that's coming up for me.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting when I hear this word like triggered with your partner, and you were giving that dishwasher example, which was like an example I was thinking of in my mind. I guess that's a really stereotypical one, is that oftentimes we think that we're sharing our vulnerability with our partner. And instead, what we're actually doing is like yelling, and we're speaking from this place of anger. We're speaking from this surface level, like there is something vulnerable that's happening for me. I don't feel safe, and I want to protect myself. So I'm going to yell whatever this is. So you might be saying something vulnerable, like, when you don't help me open the dishwasher, I feel alone. But all your partner is really seeing is that anger. They're seeing a lion, and you feel like a bunny. And so sometimes when that triggering is happening, it also is what, Chandra and Kayla were mentioning with like dropping into yourself, like giving yourself a little bit of time to just notice, like, what is that softer part of myself that's also present? Like, I'm feeling like I want to be the lion right now. Is there anything else that's present that tells me a little bit about what my value is here, like what that deeper unmet need is that's triggering me and my partner? And sometimes that can just lead to a more fruitful conversation. Otherwise, it can become very circular with those lashing out moments.
Mm-hmm. And here's where CAP can come in. Doing a medicine journey together can be really helpful for both of those functions. It can be really helpful for figuring out how to drop into that vulnerability, right? Most of us don't live our lives walking around like super in touch with our deepest, most vulnerable feelings. I actually think, Chandra, maybe you do, but like most people don't. Most of us are kind of well defended, right, in the course of our daily life. And so sometimes it takes a lot of effort and a lot of intentionality to drop into our more vulnerable feelings and thoughts. And doing a CAP journey together can be really helpful for getting us out of that yelling, harsh space and down into where we're softer, into the bunny space. That's a really cute metaphor, Skylar. It can also be really helpful at helping us hear our partner's vulnerability instead of getting distracted by their anger, getting distracted by their criticizing me, getting distracted by all I hear is how I'm not good enough, right? And it can really help us set aside some of those self-protective defenses and really hear our partner's vulnerability. So if you're thinking that this sounds familiar and you're thinking about using the self-guide, maybe center your journey around this question of how can we both drop into our vulnerability and then figure out a way to share that and really hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing just came up for me while the two of you were talking, and our partners don't know what is happening in our minds or in our bodies, and we think we do not communicate clearly most of the time, particularly when we are feeling upset. And if we want our partners to change their behavior, they will not do that unless they have a deep understanding. So no one changes because they're told to. No one changes in response to anger or criticism, or if they do, it's because they're afraid and it's very brief. But we do change when we have a deep understanding of our partners. Because at the end of the day, we want connection and we want to have happy, healthy relationships. And when I have a deep understanding that my partner feels alone if I walk through the kitchen while they're doing something and I don't acknowledge them, and that creates a lot of pain for them, like, I'll freaking acknowledge them when I walk through the kitchen. Like, that's easy. Do a little tap on the way by, or great job, or let me grab that plate. Like, that's an easy change to make. But if I'm told that I'm a bad partner, or I don't pay attention to them, or the relationship's shitty, like, I'm not even gonna walk through the kitchen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we say in therapy a lot of times, like, no emotion doesn't make sense with the context. That's a double negative. But when you have the context for someone's emotion, it can really start that natural process of having this shared common humanity. Like, of course you'd feel that way. Now I really understand. And empathy and compassion just arise naturally when we start to understand like where someone is coming from. And so often we think we're telling someone that and we aren't. So
Mm-hmm.
in the guide too,
Mm-hmm.
that's also a really nice place where like when you're offering, you're really being thoughtful about what your intentions are, or even after the medicine session, writing what came up, like really offering that space. Like there is no bigger gift you can give someone than listening and really hearing what someone said. So even just like creating a moment to really hear one another can be so powerful.
Yeah. And when you're saying so often we're not actually telling people about ourselves, often what we're doing is we're telling our partners about themselves. Like I'm telling you about what you're doing and what you're thinking, what you're feeling and what your issue is. And, and that doesn't help my partner understand me at all.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh,
Oh no.
no.
There you
Wow, that
are.
was dramatic.
You're-
Here we are. My AirPod does not want to stay in my ear. Can you all hear me?
yes.
Okay.
can.
That's funny. So telling my partner about themselves does not help them understand me at all. It does not help them have empathy for me at all. And so if you've ever been in couple therapy, I can almost guarantee that your couples therapist has probably irritated the crap out of you by saying, speak about yourself, use I statements, talk about your own experience, right? And we try and do that in a less obnoxious way also in this guide, to help you structure your conversations in a way where it's you really sharing about yourself so that your partner can understand you and develop that empathy. And then they'll be so much more capable of meeting your needs, right? When they really get you and really get where you're coming from.
All right. How do I know if someone's right for me?
What is the meaning of life?
Boy.
Gosh.
That's actually become a really common referral question too for couples seeking out couple therapy, especially amongst us millennials.
There are so many people who could be right for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we often get into relationships based on chemistry, or some initial interest. And life is, if right for me is like spending a life with someone, I would say it's really more about the work that the two of you have done and are willing to do together, because you are going to continue discovering things about each other and you're going to continue changing. And so, right for me is someone who is willing to continue learning about you and sticking in moments that are challenging and being curious and kind when everything in them is telling them to get the hell out of the situation or blow up. and someone who has at least some shared values, right? Like life is about creating memories together. And so are you someone who, needs to have travel in your life and you want to do that with a partner? So there's certain things that you want to create in your life that you'll want someone to have with you. But I think really, right, is like, is this person willing to look at their own demons and talk about them and and grow with you, be kind to you?
When you said that question, Chandra, I was thinking of Shel Silverstein's book, The Missing Piece, which I know, Kayla, you've read, which when I read it, it made me sob and sob. It's a very lovely metaphor. And so I almost wonder too if there's a big question coming up of if someone's right for me. Like sometimes that could signal it might be useful for self-exploration of just like, what are these pieces of yourself that you feel like aren't being seen or that you want to have, partnership with, and what are those needs that are really important to you? So that self-discovery is so important with understanding what you want in a counterpart. And sometimes our most painful experiences are like, tell us what is most important to us. So we'll sometimes use this metaphor of like our values are like flip sides of a coin. Like the most painful experiences you have can often tell you what are the things in your life that are most important to you. And maybe when that comes to choosing a partner, that helps you know, like, what are these boundaries? What are these like hard yeses and nos that I want to look for? But that really comes from self-exploration.
Hmm. Yeah, because what's right for you is going to really depend on what you want out of your partnership and out of your life. And so really that's got to start with a lot of self-exploration. And I really, one of the ways that I work with people is I really help them I really try to help them see the choices that they have in front of them that they can make. And at the end of the day, a relationship is a series of decisions that we make. I think a lot of folks approach relationships in a very, I don't know, maybe it's like it seems in the movies, like we just sort of sit back and wait for it to happen to us. But that's not what commitment is. That's not what a relationship is, particularly over the long term. We make a series of choices, right? And we continue to make those choices every day. And so the choices that you make are going to have, different kinds of implications. And so really thinking through the choice to be with this partner, what are the implications of that? What does that mean for me and for my life? And if that doesn't work for you, empowering yourself to make a different one. And I think sometimes people don't really feel empowered to make their own relationship decisions, but that is the way to land. That's the way to land in a relationship where the way that it challenges you is good instead of the way that it challenges you being bad for your well-being.
Yeah, both of you are talking about like learning about yourself a lot. And I think you also learn in relationship what's not right for you. And sometimes you don't know that until you experience it. And so also just being gentle with yourself in this learning process. Like sometimes you have to have a few experiences before you know what is right for you or what kind of a relationship you want to build, because you've experienced things that are very much not right for you.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different relationships for different seasons of life. So giving ourselves some kindness around that, we look back on the landscape of every relationship we've had, it's only added to our knowledge about what we want and informed us about ourselves, whether it be a good relationship or a bad one.
Yeah, or like right for that period of your life and then no longer right anymore. I'm like such a huge fan of short-term relationships. Right? Like they can be really deep and meaningful and important, and just because they've ended doesn't mean that they failed. Um, and like, people, if we think about marriage, people get married for all kinds of different reasons, and all of those can be totally valid and legitimate for you, right? We work with a lot of folks who have kind of non-traditional, particularly non-monogamous relationships. There are other folks who get married for the primary purpose of having children and raising a family, and that really prioritizes some kind of features in a partner versus others. And what's important is that you choose a partnership that matches with what you want, and each of those relationships can be super valid. They each have their own challenges and strengths. But yeah, I really do think it starts with exploring who you are and giving yourself permission to do that exploration.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the completion of a relationship is not a failed relationship. And
That's right.
so you could have had a very successful relationship that contributed to your life and you learned so much and it was beautiful in so many reasons and it reaches its completion. And that's a successful relationship.
Mhm.
What will ruin my relationship?
Lots of things.
Yeah.
What are some of the high points of things that will ruin my relationship?
You know what I'm seeing a lot right now that I think is a real problem for a lot of people is problematic alcohol use.
Mm, yeah.
I want more people to be aware of how damaging this can be for relationships. I am not a teetotaler. We are psychedelic therapists. I am not afraid of substances. I don't want this to sound like it comes from a place of me being an old granny, but I am seeing so many otherwise really good, strong relationships being really eaten up from the inside because of problematic substance use. And so I want us all to be like very honest with ourselves about the way in which we're drinking and the way in which we're using substances and like, is that actually producing the benefits that we want in our life, or is it really costing us something important?
Yeah, and if you're having any relationship challenges or any sort of challenges in your own life, do not talk about those things while under the influence of any substance. It's not going to go well. It's going to cause more damage. And the reason why we want to do this is because our frontal lobe is relaxed, it's shut down. That's what alcohol does. It takes away our impulse control. And so then we want to talk about all these things that we've been bottling up, and it is going to be destructive.
Hmm. You can do instead is do a cap journey really intentionally and set yourself up with a really safe way of accessing that vulnerability.
Yeah, I would almost say like the death nail in a lot of relationships is when there's so much that goes unsaid, and maybe you felt like you've said it all, and maybe you feel like you've really put yourself out there. And not to say that people haven't, but it's just when it can kind of feel like you're passing ships in the night and not willing to really like sit down and listen and access the vulnerable parts of yourself. And it makes so much sense when you get to a place in relationships where it doesn't feel safe to be vulnerable. It doesn't feel like if you did put yourself out there in vulnerability that you're going to be held and embraced by your partner. And so I think that like the self-awareness of like what's really happening underneath this surface level argument. Like, is it really that you went out late and you didn't call? Maybe, but maybe that's actually tapping on something really sensitive for me, and like what for that other person is causing them to like step away or feel like they're like, moving farther and farther away. And so it's like those unspoken things that really can be I think that's what can be really sad when relationships end. It's like, oh, if only that other person knew what was really happening and you have a chance to connect.
Yeah, keeping the peace will definitely ruin your relationship. I think that lots of people are afraid to have conflict because they're afraid that they won't be able to navigate it or it'll get messy or mean. And every relationship is going to have challenges, and conflict actually gives us a window to accessing our deeper vulnerabilities. And so, if you can learn how to have conflict in a way that doesn't destroy your relationship, which you can go to couple therapy, you can learn how to do that. If you're struggling to do that, then you get to repair. And when you come back together to repair, you get to learn about each other and you get to learn why it was painful and what are all the pieces under the surface. Who is my partner? That is where intimacy happens. That's where access to vulnerability and growth happens with your partner.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing that I would really say is like a major thing to watch for is sort of the slow death of a relationship because we're not keeping it alive, because we're not investing in it. I think this is what people generally mean when they say relationships take work. Like they shouldn't take work in the sense that it's like a slog every single day of your life, but they do take work in the sense that a garden takes work, right? Like you need to tend it in order for it to
Mhm.
grow. And so when one or both people stop putting in effort and energy and care into tending a relationship, it naturally will kind of wither and die. They're not self-sustaining. So, um, yeah, don't sweep things under the rug. Don't take it for granted and neglect it.
Why do 50% of people get divorced?
There have been whole books and research papers written about this.
I think all of these things that we've talked about. So people get together for all different reasons, and sometimes those things change as we grow. And so it's natural. We tend to turn into almost like different people every 8 to 10 years. And so the person who you are at the beginning of a relationship is going to be different 8 to 10 years later. And sometimes couples grow together and they decide that they want to be with this new version. And sometimes they grow into completely different people and they don't want to be with this new version. And then we don't do a great job of teaching people how to have healthy relationships. I think more people are interested in the topic now and are learning, but all of these things that we're talking about, how to be vulnerable, how to continue daily investing and kind of tending to your garden, even like knowing yourself, your own emotions, and how to communicate. We don't have a manual on that. We don't learn that in school. And so not having these skills will also lead to the deterioration of a relationship.
hmm I think that's like it, right? Is that we expect more out of our relationships today than almost ever before in human history. We expect them to meet a lot of needs. The book about this that I would recommend for people who are really interested in this is called The All or Nothing Marriage. It's a really good book about the evolution of what marriage has meant to people and what partnership has meant to people. And so we expect so much out of our partners and our partnerships, but we are not backing that up with the actual skill needed to deliver that, right? And so that discrepancy is going to result in a lot of relationships that don't end the way that people want them to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in today's world, like we're faced with this just like almost decision paralysis because we have so many choices. And I was actually reading something not long ago about how with online dating, it can take now like 30 dates to meet someone that you end up dating versus back in the day when that was not, there were no dating apps. It would be, 5 to 7 dates tops.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think about that in the context of relationships ending as well, with just having so much more access to all these things and seeing these really unrealistic and fake accounts of relationships that are showing this version of things that is not reality. And the reality is, back to that garden metaphor, it's work. And when you give the necessary components for a seed to sprout, like water and sun, it will continue to grow. It's going to take tending of those weeds and, pulling all that, pruning and all of that. And yeah, I think it's difficult when we see things online or we see things everywhere that make it seem like stuff should just be easy. That if it's not easy, it's not working. And that's just not accurate. Everything that's good is going to take work.
hmm Joyful work, right?
Joyful work.
Like, yeah, like for people who really love gardening, right? Like it's work, and you might not love every single moment of being out there pulling weeds, but like on the whole, like you do it because you love it, right? Because it is joyful. Yeah. Sometimes I see people stay in relationships where it's like work, and I'm like, okay, well maybe we gotta, reconsider that.
Labor.
Yeah.
What goes into a good apology? How do I do this well? Apologize.
I'm thinking of all the ways that apologies can be really horrible.
We can also let people know how apologies
What
can be
not
really
to do.
horrible.
Like the really taking accountability and reflecting and even asking questions to understand why someone else is hurt. If you do feel misunderstood, or you feel like you're not quite aligning with what's going on in a certain situation, if you feel like you didn't do something wrong, just that curiosity and slowing down. Often we just jump into defensiveness. So apologies can sound more like excuses or defenses than actually this like deep reflection on how your behavior impacted another person. Um, and so an apology that's not a good apology is one that really is just kind of a reflection of deflecting blame on the other person or making excuses and not getting to the root.
Mhm.
Yeah, Skylar's talking about this curiosity piece. And so, what that actually looks like, genuine curiosity. I think sometimes people think they're doing this, they think they're asking questions. So, genuine curiosity would be like, I truly want to understand what that felt like for you. Can you describe for me some of the feelings that came up, or can you describe for me kind of what stories were in your mind? I want to know, I want to understand this through your worldview. Not a question like, this doesn't make any sense. Can you please explain this to me?
Why would you feel that way?
Not those kinds of questions.
Mm-mm. I think of accountability as almost kind of having a formula, which is you have to acknowledge what you did. You have to acknowledge the behavior and the impact on the other person, right? You have to say, I did come home 2 hours later than I said I was going to, and I can recognize that you felt disrespected and hurt and scared because you didn't know where I was. You have to acknowledge. Then you have to actually apologize. You have to say, I'm sorry. A lot of people skip that, they talk around it. And then you have to change. You have to change your behavior so that it doesn't keep happening, right? Because if I say, I came home 2 hours late, I totally acknowledge how much that hurt you. I'm really sorry. And then I do it again and again and again and again, that really loses any kind of meaning, right? So acknowledgement, apology, and then change your behavior so that the same thing doesn't keep happening, which doesn't mean be perfect forever, right? Human beings are complicated and change is hard. But it does mean making an effort toward doing something differently the next time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that shifting the pattern is extremely important. I think people often come to couple therapy and they're like, I just made a mistake. I don't understand how we got here. And it's like, no one is going to leave you because you made a mistake. People are going to leave you because that mistake has happened 50 times and there's no indication that you're going to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a pattern. We end relationships because patterns don't shift.
There was an article, I cannot remember what publication it was, but it was like a think piece that came out a couple of years ago that got a lot of attention, which was called My Wife Left Me Because I Didn't Do the Dishes. And clearly, nobody's wife leaves them because they don't do the dishes one time. People's spouses leave or partners leave because there's a pattern of repeated inequity and emotional labor or something else in the relationship, right?
There's so many questions here. We're going to have to do another one.
Oh boy.
I guess this is something that we've kind of been talking about a lot tonight, just like conflict, what unhealthy conflict looks like. But what does healthy conflict look like? If a couple goes through couple therapy and like learns the skills, what does healthy conflict look like? What should people be striving toward?
Primarily, I think it looks like communicating in a way that always maintains a sense of respect and care for the other person, no matter how hard the thing we're talking about is. it always needs to be clear that even if I'm more furious at you than I've ever been in my entire life, I still respect you as a human being and I still care about you. And
Mhm.
sometimes that looks like taking a break and coming back when I can use words that are not mean. Sometimes it looks like me speaking for myself instead of telling you about you, right? So, all of the things that we talked about earlier, sharing your own feelings and perspectives instead of telling somebody about themselves. It definitely looks like not name calling and not, being cruel and hurtful on purpose. Um, but yeah, maintaining that sense of humanity always.
Mhm. Yeah, and that break is so important because when we get really, really angry, there may be kind of that urge that comes up to say something mean. And you just call a timeout on yourself and say, I need to cool down and come back. And so I think like what I'm really hearing from Kayla is like, there is an intention to care for this person. And as dysregulated or furious as you are, you don't lose sight of that. This is someone that I love, and my ultimate goal is to have a connection that is not harmful, that is
Mhm.
meaningful, that is loving.
Yeah. An act of self-compassion is also honoring your own emotions when you get to that space, when you're at a red light and you need some time to process. So I think healthy conflict also involves a good degree of self-regulation. And that's a hard skill set to learn,
Yeah.
especially if you've been in an ongoing kind of like toxic relationship where there's not a lot of safety and your fight or flight system's kind of constantly getting engaged. And so it really, you have this pressure to feel like you need to protect yourself either by like running away or attacking. And so, slowing that process down by like being able to kind of take some space for yourself to really acknowledge like what's happening for me here. Like it was it the dishes or like what's happening underneath. I think that is when people are having healthy conflict, like they're really in touch with what the deeper part of them is experiencing and able to communicate from that place.
Mhm. That's a really good point because I think sometimes people get the message that being emotionally honest or authentic means saying everything that you think and feel as soon as you think it or feel it in as extreme a way as you want to. And that's not actually what that means, right? We actually do need to be able to regulate ourselves in order to show up with both our feelings and our values, right? This is in DBT, we call it wise mind. We need to be paying attention to our emotional selves and to our sort of higher order thinking that knows what our long-term goals are and what we really value. That is what being authentic actually means. It's not just being unhinged.
And most people have never seen healthy conflict. Um, Most people saw destructive conflict that involved name calling and belittling and criticism. A lot a lot of people saw when you experience pain, create pain, right? And so that was your model.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone has any questions, make sure you put them in the chat. We can see it. And I know we've talked about a lot of different things, and we do want to answer your questions if you have them.
I think I just want to mention that, like, so part of the reason why we love doing the work that we do, we all do traditional couples therapy, but when we do couples CAP, there's something that's really special about the opportunity to do things like explore new ways of having conflict that feel healthy, to do things like get in touch with vulnerability and what it feels like to share vulnerably instead of with blame, right? To get in touch with forgiveness, like we talked about earlier. Sometimes those things feel so much more accessible when we're doing CAP. And so if you're thinking about any of these things that we're talking about here and you're like, that just seems out of reach for me, I mean, yes, you can definitely work with a couples therapist, and we know that a lot of people struggle to access couples therapy for a number of different reasons. And so you can use your prescription or something to really explore these new ways of relating and connecting with each other. And that's why we made this guide to give you some structure in being able to do that together, because the potential for healing here can be really, really powerful. And we want you to be able to experience that.
All right, I have two more questions. I have more questions, but I have two more questions that I'm going to ask. We started having problems once we started living together. Why?
I want to know more about what those problems are. Living together is hard.
Even if you think about like roommates you've had in the past, I think about people I've lived with. Like when you are close with someone and you're with someone all the time, people are in your space in a different way and you're operating with different expectations you might not have communicated about before. And you will inevitably have times where there's opportunities for healthy conflict, but there is undoubtedly a lot that needs to be communicated that like you've just never even thought of before. So how normal is that? That as soon as you live together, you have more conflict, but that doesn't mean that it can't be viewed as an opportunity potentially for getting to know someone more and also sharing more about yourself. Like maybe there's things you didn't even realize mattered to you until someone else moved into your space and you're like, wait a second, what? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're someone who's used to having things the way you want them and you're not used to living with people, then all of a sudden everything is going to not be the way you want it because you're deciding how to merge your lives together, merge your existences together. And so there's a large practice in sharing and compromise. I think another thing that comes up for people is like people often move in together kind of when like the honeymoon phase is coming to an end. People often move in together, around a year. And so there can also be this natural shift in lots of things in your relationship. So if you're having a lot of intimacy and that feels easy and it's like fireworks, and then your new relationship energy is ending and you're now around this person when they are haven't showered and are in their jammies for 4 days and eating popcorn on the couch and doing everything that annoys you, and it's not sexy, right? And so there's a shift in many pieces of the relationship probably when you're moving in together.
Yeah. Part of this comes out of research that actually was really headed up in my graduate alma mater, University of Denver. But there's a bunch of really good research on commitment and what it means to make a commitment to one another. Moving in together is a commitment. And I think a lot of people view it as a convenience, but it's not. It's a commitment. And I think we would all do ourselves and our partnerships a favor if we could view it as a commitment, which it is. And that I think prepares us to embark on it in a way that's actually much more respectful of one another and of the relationship, and expecting there to be shifts and transitions and changes so that we can be better prepared to weather those. If we go into it expecting it's no big deal, and then it actually is a big deal, I think that's when we set ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Kayla. I often hear from people like, oh, well, it's more convenient to live together because we are at each other's houses all the time, or
Yeah.
it's cheaper, we're saving on rent, right? And so there isn't this thoughtful decision around this is someone who I want to be with, who I want to build with, who I want to share with.
Right.
And that kind of a decision creates a very different result.
Yeah.
Last one. Um, what do you think is the biggest lie we've been told about love?
I think the biggest lie we see in popular culture about love is that the fireworks should never end and it should always be this new relationship energy right at the start of the relationship where you're infatuated and everything feels so exciting. And that when that fades, that means that the relationship is done. And so the biggest lie in across social media is just like expecting this unrealistic version of there's no conflict and it's always hot and heavy and it's always excitement and it's never work. That any relationship, whether that is a relationship with a family member or a friend or your partner, is going to take work and take commitment.
Yeah, I think along those lines, if someone loves you, they won't hurt you.
Yeah.
And they will hurt you. The people who love you will hurt you, no matter what, because we make mistakes. And those hurts are an opportunity for learning and reconnection and deepening. But I think when we're told that about relationships, then when someone hurts us, then we pull away and we throw our walls up and we exit the relationship or we hurt them back. And so knowing that like truth, that the person who loves you will hurt you, I think gives a lot more options for possibilities in deepening connection.
Yeah. I would say I think the biggest lie about love is that it's just something that happens to you rather than something that you are an active participant in. That you can choose what love means to you. You can choose how you love people and how you want to be loved. And you can choose whether or not to be in a relationship, even if there is love. Just because you love someone doesn't mean that you're right for each other or that it's the right choice for you. And similarly, there's not just one right way to love somebody in a relationship. So we're actively creating it together rather than just waiting for it to happen to us.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, like you can learn all of this stuff. I think that people are like, well, I didn't know what to do. And so I just keep like ending up in these scenarios. Like you can learn all of this. You can create whatever kind of relationship you want. Every single person can have a healthy relationship. Cool. We did it.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll do another one.
If you have questions we didn't answer, reach out to us on the socials or on our email. And we are also available to provide additional support. Skylar actually has room on her therapy caseload. If you're in California, she's going to fill up fast. So if you want to get in, get in. And all of us are available for coaching. We also offer weekend intensives and lots of other ways of helping you out. So get in touch if we can be a further help or if you just want to chat or have questions.
And if you put comments on this video, I think it's going to live on our YouTube and one of us will hop on there occasionally and we'll answer your questions there too.
Chandra, it will definitely be Chandra. She says
I
one
will
of us,
do
like,
that.
like either
Yes.
Skylar or I do anything on the socials.
I will do it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.